Hey guys, it's Shannon and John from That DIY Couple.
And today we're going to be talking about going to law school. So the first question about law school might be, what exactly is law school? And it's different from country to country. So in the US, law school is a 3-year graduate program. And in basically every US state, you have to go to law school before you can become a lawyer, before you can legally practice law. What that means is that we both went to college, university, undergrad, whatever you want to call it, for 4 years. We graduated with a bachelor's degree, and then we both went to law school, which is 3 more years. So if you want to become a lawyer in the US, it's a 7-year program. And then at the end of the 7 years, you take a big test called the bar exam, and that sort of gives you your license to practice law in any one given state. In other countries, for your knowledge, it's different, where your law degree can be accomplished at the same time or instead of your undergraduate degree. And you might get a bachelor's degree in law or something equivalent to that instead of a JD, which is a Juris Doctorate. It's the degree that you get in the US when you graduate from law school. There are other law degrees as well. There's an LLM, which is a legal master's degree. There's kind of the equivalent of a PhD in law that you can get if you want to go into academia, for example. But generally, every lawyer that you meet in the US will have a JD, and that'll be achieved after going to law school for 3 years.
So the second question we're going to answer is, why did we decide to go to law school? So for me, like many young people, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life. But when I sort of evaluated, like what was in my heart and what I felt was the right thing for my life, I knew that I wanted to make a difference in some way, shape, or form. And I had had the privilege of studying abroad and learning how to speak fluent Spanish and Portuguese. And I always felt best when I was engaging with other people and sort of bridging cultural gaps and learning and trying to just like make a little bit of a difference in the way that America is perceived in other countries. And so I knew I wanted to do something in foreign policy. I wanted to do something in US diplomacy. And I looked at some of the people that I admired in that field, and I noticed that they had all either gone to law school or they'd had a pretty, large career as a lawyer before becoming diplomats or, working as Secretary of State or in the State Department as a second career, or they had gone to business school. And I found that I was more drawn to the law school side because I like to read, write, and analyze, and I felt like that would be a good career for me, something to give me a base of analytical thinking, expressing myself, leadership, and also to be able to make a good income in a way that would allow me to provide for myself and for my family and be able to donate to causes that I, thought were worthy in the interim.
Yeah, I went to law school for a little bit of a different reason. So I always was interested in being an entrepreneur, working for myself. I thought originally in maybe the technology space, and now more recently I do stuff in the real estate space. But I thought that having a law degree would be a great way to sort of learn about the inner workings of business. And it sounds a little bit counterintuitive because you might assume that an MBA, which is a business school degree, would be the best way to do that. But I had talked to my family and my parents, and I have a half brother who himself is a lawyer, and I learned that a lot of decision making, a lot of important things that happen in business are actually driven by law. So contract law, maybe real estate law, securities law, all these things are kind of surrounding and swirling around business. And it's really important, even if you're not a lawyer, but are a business person or an entrepreneur, to have a really good understanding of the law. So I went to law school thinking that this would be a great credential to have. And kind of as a secondary reason, I thought it'd be a great intellectual exercise. And I found that I really was drawn to some of the more intellectual aspects of law. If you haven't really conceived of being a lawyer before, a big aspect of law is learning about U.S. history, U.S. constitutional law, U.S. constitutional history, the different thinkers and theories and kind of processes that went into making law. And I was really drawn to that just for a personal enjoyment level. So I went to law school not actually wanting to be a lawyer, but wanting to use my law degree to do something in the world of business.
So, what does it mean to be a lawyer? What kind of careers are available to you? We all know that when people say, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up, when they're little, they're typically thinking about what they've seen on TV, like the classic courtroom, you know, somebody litigating and defending someone who's innocent or prosecuting somebody who's guilty, getting up in front of a judge and arguing. That's one type of lawyer. So that's what we call a litigator. My dad is a practicing litigator, and that's how he's made his career.
But I would caveat that to say that the number of times he actually goes before a judge, or any litigator goes before a judge and argues, is pretty minimal. There are certain types of lawyers that do that all the time, but I would say if you were to take like 100 lawyers and say, how many of you frequently argue before a judge or a jury, the number of lawyers that do that is very minimal. I mean, it's probably less than 10%.
So I think most people's vision of what a lawyer is either that, it's something that they have on TV, or it's like an ambulance chaser, somebody, which is a word that describes somebody who's following the ambulance to try to give them their number, you know, to be able to sue sue the other driver, sue the company if the person has slip and fall. And that's kind of a solo practitioner who tends to work for themselves and does a lot of like slip and fall type
personal
cases.
Injury
personal
lawyers.
injury.
Yeah.
That's a personal injury lawyer. That's the, you know, call 788-642, you know, like those kinds of commercials that you see on the TV advertising a lot. Or have you been injured in an auto accident? Do you have mesothelioma? Those are what we would call a personal injury lawyer. And then there's like the other classic one, which is like putting away the bad guys, the law and order lawyers, or, you know, defending the criminals, like the white collar. Those are all different types of criminal lawyers.
Yeah, so criminal lawyers, there could be prosecutors or defenders. But again, in the universe of lawyers, these are just one subset of lawyers. So, for example, that I don't actually practice law full time, and I think that if you've watched our other videos, that might be clear. But Shannon, for example, does.
Right.
And the sort of law that she does is totally unrelated to what we just talked about.
So I am what is called a corporate lawyer. And this is the type of lawyer that you don't hear a lot about. You don't, like, it's not a glamorous career that people talk about. But maybe...
I think it's pretty glamorous.
You know, people ask me a lot if I've seen Suits. I think that these might be the types of lawyers on Suits. I haven't actually seen that show, though. But basically,
we're 2018ing ourselves here.
So I worked for a very large, you know, Manhattan, like white shoe law firm where we represented large, you know, private equity clients, and we helped them with their private equity fund documents, and the litigation department of our law firm helped them with their litigation, and we represented like large Wall Street banks and huge companies, you know, big like, you know, Facebook type companies for IPOs and things like that. And that's what's called a corporate lawyer, a lawyer who assists large businesses with their legal needs. So every time that, you know, someone buys a huge apartment complex or raises a huge fund or does an IPO of their public company, they need a team of lawyers to hammer out all the details. And that's the type of lawyer that I am. And those are the types of lawyers, I'll just say, who like tend to make a little bit more money than I would say your average. It depends on the region. It depends on your like the practitioner. But those tend to be like tends to be a fairly lucrative career as compared to, say, a public defender or someone who works for like a state entity. We should also say that there's also like judges and an entire class of lawyers who work for you know, the government.
Yeah, they're government lawyers, judges, prosecutors, regulatory people who work for
the SEC,
cities, states, the federal government, counties, things like that.
Every regulatory or government institution that you can think of, like the SEC or the EPA or the Justice Department, they all have a team of lawyers. So you can work in those professions, and that tends to be a fairly good quality of life job with good benefits and
yeah. So suffice it to say that one common misconception about lawyers is that lawyers somehow are able to do anything just because they're a lawyer. In the same way that you might assume a doctor, just because he's a doctor, can do, you know, surgery and treat your cancer and, you know, help you lose weight. Lawyers are very specialized. So if you went up to, say, Shannon and said, I'm getting a divorce, can you help me with my divorce? I mean, I don't think that you would know anything about that.
Right.
Basically,
But if you were to come to me and say, I'm thinking about raising a fund to invest in real estate, then I could help you.
Right. Like if someone were to come to me and say, hey, I need help. I just broke my leg in a car accident. I don't know anything about that, basically more than you might know about that just by Googling online, like how do I get money for my car accident injury. But I do know a little bit about contract law and about property law and things like that, which is what I deal with every day in my actual job. So the things that you learn at law school sometimes relate to what you do after law school, but sometimes they don't. So one way to think of a lawyer is also to think of the same way that you might a doctor. So if a doctor does anesthesia, they probably don't know a lot about brain surgery, or at least they might not know as much as a brain surgeon would. The same is true about lawyers who specialize in different things.
Which I think is a general thing that you learn as you get older, is that school teaches you how to think, and then to a certain extent it prepares you, but unless you're going to a truly vocational school, which is the type of school where you're learning how to become a electrician, how to become a refrigerator repair guy, how to become a welder or something like that, those types of vocational schools really prepare you for a particular profession by teaching you the nuts and bolts of how to do the work. Law school is a little bit different in that it teaches you legal principles. It teaches you how to read, write, and analyze, but you really learn the work of lawyering through years of experience and practice.
Right. So one question about going to law school, maybe the most common question about going to law school, surrounds the economics of being a lawyer. How much does it cost to go to law school? How much can you make as a lawyer when you graduate? Does it make sense for me to consider that as a career path? What are the kind of numbers that all surround it? And one important thing to consider about law school is that it's very expensive to become a lawyer in the U.S. Generally, you're paying out of pocket for 3 years of education, and that can be comparable to the cost of a good private university in the U.S. So at the very high end of the range, you're looking at $50,000 plus per year. There are some state schools and other options if you're in state that are significantly cheaper, but generally law school is going to be very expensive. And one important thing to consider is that whereas for undergraduate universities, you might be able to get financial aid based on need, in law school that is very rarely the case. You can sometimes get academic scholarships depending on your performance as an undergrad, or maybe other extraneous factors. You might be able to get grants, but generally much more likely you're going to be paying for law school out of pocket, and you're going to be doing that either
debt.
Yeah, you're going to be doing that either with your own money or by taking out student loans. So for us, for example, we both went to prestigious law schools. We both went to what I think in the parlance of lawyers would be a top 14 law school. And as a result, our legal educations were both very expensive. I think my tuition was like $50,000 per year, and I think yours was the same way. So we both went into debt during law school in different ways. You took out student loans for the whole thing. I had some money that my parents had been saving for me since I was really young that helped me go to law school, but I still went into debt by paying for things like housing expenses and food and stuff like that, books, when I was a lawyer. Once you graduate from law school, there are a whole range of options that you can do, but by far the most lucrative option for a new lawyer is to go down what most people would call like the corporate law or big law path. And that generally means working for a larger law firm, doing something like litigation, corporate law, things like that. Every state and every city will have like some major big law firm. In New York, or in Boston, in DC, San Francisco, LA, there are a ton of them. But even in smaller cities, there's going to be some big law firm that has hundreds of lawyers, and that's going to be the most prestigious and well-compensated way that you can make money after law school. On the other end of the perspective, kind of like the least well-compensated lawyers are usually often public defenders, or lawyers that might be working in some capacity where they're essentially volunteering their time. Public defending is a really attractive option for a lot of people going to law school because you feel like you're kind of fighting injustice and you're helping people in need. But unfortunately, it's not very well compensated, just relative to other lawyers. So to put
although there is an option to get loan forgiveness when you're working for government agencies, right, which is a real economic value to doing some types of like nonprofit and or government work.
Yeah, so to put actual numbers to what we're saying, at the very high end, being a lawyer, you can expect to make, in New York City, for example, working at a corporate big law job, you can expect to make $190,000 in 2018, graduating from law school, and then also
plus
a $10,000 bonus.
So you're all in. So all in, your law school costs you between 50 and 60,000 per year for tuition times 3 years. But then in your first year, if you're able to score one of those top jobs, you're going to make 200 grand. So if you are among the lucky people who's able to sort of trickle down into that very small subset of people who score a big law job in a big city like New York, or San Francisco or Houston, one of these larger cities that sort of sets the salary, you're gonna do well. Like, it'll easily be an easy cost benefit analysis, because if you're able to work that type of job for a couple of years, you can pay down your debt and then sort of quickly accumulate more money. And if you stay on that track and you eventually are one of the few people who trickles down into the group that becomes partner, you're going to be making, easily $500,000 to $1 million plus per year, potentially until your 60s and you retire.
And solar practitioners can actually make a lot of money as well, but it'll be something that happens over time. So a solar practitioner is a little bit what we were talking about before. It's like someone who might do personal injury law, or might open up their own practice to do divorce law, family law,
they might do
things
class
like
action
that.
lawsuits.
Class action lawsuits.
Solo practitioners and people who work at smaller law firms in general generally need to have much better people skills and much better sales skills, because they need to drum up their own business. If you go and you work for a really large law firm, you're going to get, excellent training. You're going to work on very complex and sophisticated transactions. But in general, that, eat what you kill, like bringing in business is not as important as a young associate, because the firms have so much work to do.
Right, and if you're more interested in doing things, like I said before, about being a public defender, maybe being a prosecutor, then the career path for that is working for either like a state or even a federal organization doing criminal law stuff. And that is generally not super well compensated. But as Shannon said, you can get loan deferment, and over time you can make quite a lot of money doing that.
You can get loan forgiveness.
You can get loan forgiveness after a while, and you can also defer your loans for a certain amount of time depending on the sort of law that you're doing.
And there's practicing. A quality of life component, right? So like lawyers who work at really large law firms are typically they're typically quite unhappy people, and they're working all the time. And it's known for being like a, unforgiving, sort of relentless job where, I had times when I was working on mergers and acquisitions where, I wouldn't have anything to do for most of the day, and then at 5 p.m. I would get a bunch of work and I'd be there until 3 or 4 in the morning, or I would have people who were senior to me say, bring your pillow in case you can snag a couple of hours underneath your desk tonight, because we're going to be here all night. So that's, you're making a lot, but you're also working a lot more hours, and when you do the hourly calculation, it's not as good as it sounds when you do the annual calc.
Right. Yeah, your dollars per hour, your hourly wage is actually relatively low, given the amount of hours.
It's still high, but like it's not as high as the amount.
It's not as high as the number seems.
As it seems. And maybe I should say that like the exit career paths when you're working at a law firm are to stay at the law firm and attempt to become a partner there, or to go in-house and work for a large company,
or go to a smaller law firm. Some people leave law entirely.
Right, strike out on your own, to go transition over to the business side. In general, a legal degree is a good degree to get if you're someone who wants to have options, because you can always do other things with it too. You can become a judge, you can do the business side.
Well, I think that's actually kind of a controversial point. So there's one perspective that says getting a legal degree is great because you can do a lot of things with it, and there's another perspective that says getting a legal degree is like getting a dentistry degree. If you're not a dentist, having a dentistry degree perhaps is not that useful. So we can talk a little bit briefly about our experience. I mean, I went to law school knowing that I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I would say that is uncommon, and I would not necessarily recommend that to other people, both because of the cost, and also the cost in raw dollars, the opportunity cost, in that you're spending this time going to law school and not making money, and then just the raw cost of your time. You're spending 3 years in a legal education that you might not really use exactly. if you are not planning to practice law, I would say there are two options about going to law school. The first is don't go to law school, and the second is go to the absolute most prestigious law school that you possibly can go to. Because, like it or not, law is a very prestige-driven profession. And we can go all into why that is and why it's bad, but the reality is that if you go to a Ivy League top 14 Harvard Yale type law school, you're going to be looked at differently than if you went to a state law school, perhaps, even though your education might be similar, even though you might be a great lawyer or a better lawyer. It's just the way that it is for many law firms and even for many clients looking for lawyers. If you're not going to be practicing law, having a law degree from a very prestigious institution will carry more weight than a lesser institution, because people will look at you and say, well, this guy that has, a law degree from Stanford must really know what he's doing, even if he's not actually practicing law. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, law is very prestige driven, for better or for worse, probably for worse. I agree. I mean, when young people ask me, should I go to law school, I say it depends on what you want and if you are going to go to law school, you need to go to the very best law school, unless it's free, unless you're able to get a situation where you have like a full ride scholarship and you're living at home and the only thing you're getting is the opportunity cost of you not working, then I think you can afford to sort of take a risk and spend that time for the potential of getting a more lucrative career. But if you don't have that luxury and you're taking out loans and you're not able to live at home, et cetera, you need to go to the very best law school that you get into. And if you don't get into a T14, top 14 law school, I think you need to seriously consider not going to law school, because it's extremely unlikely that you're going to make enough money to pay back the student loans that you take out unless you get a prestigious law firm job at a big law firm in your city.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't agree with that. I think that if you want to be a lawyer, if that's your passion, you should go to law school for any cost and at any amount.
I disagree. As a rational economic actor, you're unlikely to get, unless you're okay with a ton of student debt for the rest of your life, which maybe you are. Maybe that's the cost that's working to you, but you need to be aware that that is the cost, because a lot of people get lured into this, I'm going to go to law school and then I'm going to make a ton of money, when the vast reality is that tons of people go to law school, take out tons of loans, and then are not able to pay those loans back and are still struggling to pay them back, for 30 years afterwards. And this kind of debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy, so it follows you to the grave. And because of compound interest, it grows and it balloons. So if you want to go to law school, you need to be serious about being ready to practice law in a profession that's going to pay you enough to pay your loans. So if you're someone like me who has a strong, I want to save the world type attitude, you need to realize that you're not going to make a lot of money saving the world. And at first, before you can do that, you have to work in a corporate job to pay down your debt and save for yourself and your family and your future. And if you want to go straight into the nonprofit world or diplomacy or the State Department or something like that, you can do that without a law degree and without taking on that enormous debt.
I agree with that, but at the end of the day, I think that if it's your goal to be a lawyer, if that's something you find you're passionate about, then you should do it. And it doesn't really matter. I still think you should try to go to the best law school, most prestigious law school that you can, only because of the importance of prestige in law. But I think that you should find a way to do it. But
just
I
be
think the
aware
caveat
of the
is that
actual cost.
it's expensive and you might not make the sort of money that you think you're going to be making.
Yeah, honestly, realistically, if you're looking to go to law school now and you want to be okay financially afterwards, if you're taking out debt, you need to go to a top 14 law school and you need to be within the top 10% of your class there during your first year. So the first year is the very most important year. That's when all the sort of hiring decisions are made after your first year summer. And your first year grades are incredibly important. You cannot afford to just get there and then kind of figure it out as you go. You have to go in, kill it immediately.
I don't think it's that stark. I mean, I think, we're kind of talking, we both went to law school during the Great Recession when times were really tough and it was very competitive to get a good job. I think if you do well at law school, you'll have good career options. I don't think if you go to a T14 law school, top 14 law school, and you're not the top 10%, you're not going to get a job.
Yeah, it's probably like more like top 20.
But,
when we went to law school, it was top 10. Now it's probably like top 25, something like that.
It's a lot better than that. But point being is go to a good law school, do really well, and but don't go in necessarily the assumption that you're going to get super rich, because there are many lawyers that we know that are not like super doing financially great, and there are also lawyers that we know that are like absolutely extremely financially wealthy. So
So it depends on you.
Depends on you. If you have any specific questions about law school or our experience with law, we'd love to talk to it in more detail. Applying to law school, we've both done that.
Interviewing, on-campus interview tips, things like that.
Career choices after,
Yeah.
options. We both kind of taken different paths from it, but I think neither of us regret going to law school by any extent, but we'd love
No, we loved
to
it.
explore the experience with you. So let us know if that's interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.